Please welcome Ancient Aliens executive producer, Max Thompson.
Hi, welcome to Secrets of the Maya. On the panel today, we have Jason Martell. David Childress. And Giorgio Tsoukalos.
Good morning.
It's the afternoon.
Lots of love up here. Yeah, so let's just jump into it. David, do you want to start with just tell us who the Maya were and how long the civilization was actually around?
Well, the Maya are a mysterious bunch, and they exist mainly in southern Mexico and Guatemala, but also in Honduras and El Salvador as well. And they think now that the Mayans and ultimately the Olmecs, who were before them, were all the way down into Panama and up into northern and the Pacific coast of Mexico too. The Mayans, they think, go back to 500 to maybe 1000 BC, and we have to remember that before the Mayans, there was another group called the Olmecs, whom the Mayans also inherited a lot of things from, including the calendar and the number system and the hieroglyphs. And so they're another mysterious civilization too. But yeah, I mean, the whole idea of what happened to the Maya is also a mystery. The Mayans abandoned nearly 1,000 cities in the Petén jungles, and that whole area, like millions of people live there in the Petén jungles of what's Quintana Roo and the Yucatan and northern Guatemala. And what happened to all those people and where they went, we do not know what happened to them. Although Mayans still live in areas of Quintana Roo and Guatemala. There are still Mayans there.
In terms of the who predated the Maya, and also like what were the other cultures that were around at that time? Can you go into the Olmec specifically and what's been
okay?
Found?
Yeah, let me go on to that. So before the Maya was another mysterious group that we don't even know their name. We call them the Olmecs, the rubber people, and it was this culture that started the ball games, the rubber ball games that were played. Those ball games, by the way, were played here in Texas, and they were played, ball courts have been found as far north as Utah. And so we have the ball courts, and they're all using the rubber balls that are coming from Guatemala and those jungles of Central America where that comes from. So we know that there was trade going from there all the way up into the Four Corners, into Utah, trade of exotic feathers and things. But eventually the Olmecs, who are so mysterious, and we don't know really who they were, the Olmecs, the Mayans were very distinctive, and many of them were cone heads, and they had elongated heads. But they were more of a homogeneous kind of culture. But the Olmecs had people from all over the world. Some of them looked like they were Africans, others looked very Chinese and Oriental, others were more Caucasian looking with thick beards and mustaches, and others looked more like the Mayans or say Native Americans. And that's one of the mysteries too that we get in Mesoamerica, is that American Indians traditionally do not have facial hair. They don't grow mustaches, they don't grow beards, they don't need to shave. But we have many images of people there who have heavy beards, full mustaches. And so this is an enigma too of who all these people are, because it seems as if people were coming from all over the world into southern Mexico and Guatemala.
And Jason, can you talk a little bit about what happened to as far as what we know about the Maya civilization, what happened to their history and how much of it has been lost and what has been discovered in the jungles since then, since the time of the Spanish?
Well, one of the things that I've always found interesting is the whole fact that, the Mayans had a very intricate calendar system, several different calendar systems. One of them they used to make more or less future predictions. They were called Baktuns, kind of looking ahead. And one of these Baktuns explained that on a certain time frame, they were expecting their god, Kukulkan, to return. And it seemed to be right in the time frame of when the conquistadors, unfortunately, came to invade the Mayans. So we have a really interesting story of the conquistadors showing up in their beautiful ships and their shiny wardrobe gear and such, and the Mayans pretty much opening their whole civilization to these people, thinking that they were something that they weren't. And what do we have? The conquistadors aggressively convert everybody to Christianity and burn all the codices. So to this day, we only have a few of these codices left. But what we found and what they've proven to show us is a wealth of information, astronomical information, mathematical information. I've been very fascinated by the more astronomical piece. As David just mentioned, the declining of the Mayans is something that we can't really pinpoint for their specific civilization what happened. But if we take a little bit of a macro view, and we've heard of this thing called precession, and that there's a dark age and a golden age, the Mayans seem to be fitting in along with many other civilizations in that time period that were also in a decline. Meaning, if you go to 3800 BC and you look at Sumer, first dynastic pharaohs of Egypt and what they were doing and creating, you see unbelievable architecture, pyramids and statues that could not have been made by hand. But then you see a decline. It's almost as if we were going into a dark age and we lost a lot of this information. So the Mayan culture may have been a part of that change where there was a declining across the globe into a dark age, and that affected all the great civilizations.
And what's also fascinating about the Mayan calendar is that, in 2012, this was the topic du jour. Everybody was talking about the end of the world. And if you look at what the Mayans actually said, was not that it was the end of the world, it was the end of a period of time, and then a new period of time begins. And what I find so fascinating is that not many people talked about the beginning of the Mayan calendar, because we also know when that was, and this is the 11th of August, 3114 BC. Now we all have to agree that according to official narration, the Maya did not exist in 3000 BC. So why would they mention this date of 3114 BC? Well, there is a so-called Book of the Jaguar Priests, the Chilam Balam book. And in there it is actually described that on 11th of August 3114 is when the gods of heaven descended from the sky. And so what if this whole idea came from an extraterrestrial visitation, and that calendar was imparted by us to us by the extraterrestrials? But it applies to a different time zone, because the Mayan calendar had to be adjusted to our time frame. And here's the other big, gigantic thing that nobody talks about, and that is that, yes, in 2012, which was our 2012, this so-called new time period would begin. But here's the problem. Right now, it is not October 5th, 2019. It's something either 20 years in the future or 20 years in the past, because in the Middle Ages, when they kept our calendars, the monks in different monasteries around Europe, they made mistakes. Because remember, monks made beer and alcohol. So sometimes they were completely off their rockers. So mistakes were made in the Middle Ages by recording our own chronology. And so right now, it could be either 2009 or 2029 or something like this, which means that we don't exactly know when this new period of time will begin.
We've featured the Maya a lot on Ancient Aliens, and one thing that I'm always fascinated by is the fact that we think we've kind of told the whole story of the Maya, but we never have, because they're constantly finding new evidence. And one thing that I've spoken a lot with David Childress about, which I find really interesting, is how archaeologists tend to they placed the Maya in a specific area of Mesoamerica, and there's a certain time frame. And they're constantly finding things that belong to the Maya civilization that are outside of that area or outside of that time frame or overlap with area that they say was only Aztec or only, those boundaries are kind of, made up by guesswork. And so I think that there's so much more that we're discovering. Can you talk about, any of you really, but just what has been found just in the last few years in terms of whether it's cities that are buried in the jungle or new evidence, new translations even going back to the King Pakal sarcophagus?
Yeah, let me just start out there. Just in the last few years, through LiDAR, radar, satellite radar scanning of the jungles and things like that, they have uncovered all kinds of new Mayan cities. Almost every year they're discovering a very large Mayan metropolis in the Petén jungle area. And this whole area was depopulated at sometime around 700 AD or so, and just en masse, all of these people, and there were millions of people there, pyramid cities, roads, canals, coconuts are all through that area too. And millions of people live there, and then suddenly they all just abandoned these cities and basically disappeared. There are still, Mayans didn't completely disappear, and there are still Mayans living in Quintana Roo and also in Guatemala. And even the Mayan language is not dead. Too, people are still speaking Mayan. In fact, Quiche Mayan, and that's, the Popol Vuh and the Chilam Balan book that Giorgio was just mentioning. But what happened to all these people? And it's a major mystery in archaeology. Why the Maya suddenly abandoned all these cities? And I mean, we're talking about millions of people just suddenly vanished. And even today, this area is completely depopulated. There's only a few chicleros who are the rubber guys, and you go into these areas. There's a lot of looting going on. They believe that there's over 10,000 pyramids still out there in those jungles, and it's just a jungle now that are covering these pyramids. And it's a place, if you wanted to go out and be Indiana Jones and find a lost city and then name it after your father, that's the place to go. And literally, get a machete and head out into this area. And this is where also...
Don't get any ideas.
Well, and this is the area too where allegedly some of the crystal skulls have been discovered and things like that.
Probably some gold treasures still buried out there somewhere too.
Well, that's right, and actually,
absolutely.
And a famous jade mask was looted out of one of these Mayan cities. It's called Rio Azul, and then it was smuggled to Europe, and it ended up in a auction catalog and stuff like that. So there is that going on, and this whole area is vast. And what mainstream archaeologists suspect, but they can't really explain it, is they think that there was an extended drought that lasted in this area, and this drought somehow forced all of these people out of this area. But it's a big argument within archaeological circles of what happened to all these people and where they went and why they left.
One comment on the drought too that's interesting is that a lot of these sites that we look at on Google Maps today, Cusco, Machu Picchu, Egypt, Giza, you can see that the time of delineation for like the Nile used to be right up on the pyramid. It's 8 miles or several miles away now. How long geologically did it take for that to happen? Lake Titicaca, you can see that the lake used to lap right up on the shores of Machu Picchu, Cusco, some of these sites. The waters have receded vastly, and so can we use that as some type of geological marker to also assess time?
Go ahead.
Look, one of the most famous ancient pieces of evidence for the ancient astronaut theory is the slab of Palenque. It's this tombstone that sits on the lid of a sarcophagus in which they found this King Pakal. And since the 60s, Eric von Däniken, whenever he is asked, what is your smoking gun, he automatically goes to the Palenque tombstone. And what's so fascinating is that around the tombstone itself, there are these Mayan glyphs. And, you know, the picture itself, if you're not familiar, which I doubt that there's not a single person in here who can't picture the Palenque slab right now, is this really technological looking frame, looks like a vehicle almost, and there's this dude sitting in there in a reclined position, manipulating some controls with his feet on a pedal, and he, you know, there's tubes everywhere, and this thing coming out like almost like it looks like a rocket ship essentially.
And like a rocket exhaust.
Right, at the bottom you see actually flames. And so here's the thing, that the archaeologists are saying, oh no, this is just King Pakal as he is swallowed up by the underground monster. And as he is being mauled, a tree of life grows out of his chest. Well, what's a tree of life? It's a hollow phrase. There is no such thing. It's something that the archaeologists invented. And so, you know, and this is, by the way, the translation that was accepted for at least 50 to 60 years was that this was King Pakal's journey to the underworld. Well, about 10, 15 years ago, this father-son team of Maya professors, Stewart and Stewart, forgive me, I don't know their first name, they wrote a book called Eternal City Palenque. And in there, they retranslated this band of glyphs around the sarcophagus, and it actually says, this is King Pakal's journey, not to the underworld, but to the Milky Way. So what more do you want? Because that Palenque stone slab was not carved by an extraterrestrial. It was carved by a human artist who lived at least 1,000 years ago, who had no idea about space travel. And then all of a sudden they witnessed something or someone descending from the sky. And maybe they had to bury that dude there. And so what did they do? They pictured him inside the vehicle with which he arrived. And of course there is all of a sudden a tree of life and a peacock at the top, a quetzal bird actually, because they had to somehow make sense of this. And this is why all of a sudden we have these complications with so-called misunderstood technology. It's all cargo cult behavior.
And
I think that, by the way, they think that Lord Pakal was about 8 feet tall. Yeah, because it's a sarcophagus. They don't actually have his skeleton and bones and stuff, but the sarcophagus is very, very large. It would hold somebody about 8 feet tall. And by the way, if you do go to Palenque, which is in Chiapas, and it's a popular tourist spot there in Mexico, Eric Bogdanica is famous there. I mean, they love him. He's the superstar of that site. And I mean, he really put Palenque on the map. I mean, they love him there. I mean, he's a hero in Palenque. And they actually do things. They make kind of fun of the Palenque, the sarcophagus lid of him, and they have him riding on a Harley Davidson. I mean, he's in all kinds of things, so it's pretty cool. And they play it up as much as they can.
And building on that idea of misunderstood technology, talk about the stories of the Maya and also the Aztec, and with Kukulkan and Quetzalcoatl, and just all the different types of gods that are depicted.
Well, it's so fascinating because the pin that Max here is wearing is actually an Olmec little figurine that can be found at the Natural History Museum in New York City in their Central America department. And what's so fascinating is that I call this dude the Rocket Man because, I'm sorry we don't have a picture, but I'm sure you know what I'm referring to. It is this guy inside what seems to be some type of a pressurized suit. He's got knee pads on his chest. There are some, it's like a breathing apparatus with tubes coming out. And then on his back, he has 6 wings. And at the top of his head, there is a skull cap, just like modern day astronauts wear during takeoff, especially during the Apollo program. So, you know, the idea essentially is, or the question is, that because the Olmecs, and he was saying earlier, that there was so much contact between previous cultures, the wings to me indicate that they had aviation with which they were able to reach the other places in the world. So these are all incredibly fascinating things, because they essentially utilized the wings with which to signify flight. And of course there was boats and things like that also, but we're suggesting on top of that they also had access to flight technology.
Yeah, that these birdmen could fly. There's many famous Olmec artifacts or jade artifacts and things where these Olmec figures, who also have the elongated cone heads and stuff, and they have wings. Which would symbolize, these people, they fly through the air and in airships and things like that. When you go to Tiwanaku on Lake Titicaca, it's in Bolivia today, in South America, and Pumapunku is right nearby there, and with the H blocks and all that famous stuff. What's at the famous Gate of the Sun at Tiwanaku, and it's one of the most famous things that's there. What's there is in the center of the gate is supposedly the god Viracocha, and he has a big feathered headdress, and he's holding two mysterious staffs on either side of him. But the rest of the door, it's a giant monolithic door carved out of granite. It's quite amazing, and there's a number of them at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, but this is the famous one that they stood up. But on either side of Viracocha, as he's standing on the door, there's about 20 birdmen, winged birdmen on either side of him, and they're all running toward him, and they all have wings on their backs, just like you're talking about. And they're these birdmen. They fly through the air. They have wings, and and it's a mysterious thing. Archaeologists don't know what's going on here, but they're running towards this central figure.
Well, and they're also saying that, anything having any depictions with people with wings or, hybrid creatures, as we find in Egypt, for example, these half man, half animal beings, creatures, that all that stuff is fantasy because our ancestors couldn't figure out nature. Well, who is insulting whom here? Because I always thought that we should listen to our ancestors, and if they are the ones who say that birdmen existed, or oftentimes also even the archaeologists are calling them celestial beings. I can't tell you how many times in museums around the world I've seen people flying up in the sky, either in paintings, carvings, or artifacts, and it says celestial beings. So even the archaeologists are saying, these are celestial beings, and then they say, okay, case closed, mystery solved, that's it, we can go home and crack open a beer. Well, no, the question should be, where or what do these celestial beings actually mean, and what did our ancestors try to depict? The statue of this rocket man is about this tall. It's very, very short. It's made out of clay. And back in the mid-90s, when I first came across this little figurine, there was actually a plaque next to it, and it said, God of Textiles, Veracruz region, and nothing else is further known. God of Textiles. It's another hollow phrase. It does not exist. It's an invention by archaeologists. And so, if you're ever in New York City, go check out the Natural History Museum. It's one of the best museums on earth. Also the Metropolitan Museum of Art, of course. And earlier, in one of these earlier sessions, if you're ever in Hawaii, go and check out the Bishop Museum. Bishop Museum is incredible, and talk about winged beings in Hawaii. Crazy stuff.
One last comment too, sorry.
Just one second, let me just say one more thing before I go say. With Sumerian seals as well, in Sumeria, the seals, the depictions of the Anunnaki are also typically that they are winged, and they have wings as well. Not always, but often they wear a special kind of a hat, and they have wings, also showing that, they can fly.
Power of flight. Yeah, I was just going to make one other comment too when we talk about Kukulkan, Viracocha. Whenever you see pictures of these beings, they're tall, pale skin, red hair. They don't look anything like the indigenous Mayan people that are shorter, dark hair, dark skinned. Their gods look completely, almost alien in sense. And you kind of see this across the board with various other cultures, Dogon tribe, Dagu in Japan. You look at these gods, And they all do seem to have characteristics that would represent either a spaceman or something with wings, some type of power of flight. So it is very interesting to see a disconnect between the local people and what they worship as gods.
And actually, I mean, that's a good point you're making there too, about the Mayans that exist today are actually very short. And most of them live in Guatemala. And in fact, Guatemala is the country with the shortest women of any country. And you would think men too. But when you're in those Mayan areas, you're kind of astonished at how short they are. I mean, many other people, yeah, I mean, they're only 5'2" or 5'3". I mean, even the men. And the women are often barely 5 feet tall. So yeah, the Mayans themselves, as they exist today, are very short, diminutive people. But like Lord Bacall was apparently, they think, like 8 feet tall.
Another interesting thing too is, especially when you look at Quetzalcoatl, who was described as being this plumed or feathered serpent, meaning a flying snake. And I can assure you that the Mayans, who were people living in nature, just like all of us back in the day, our ancestors, they all lived with and in nature. Do you really think they would not know that snakes don't fly? So why would they describe a flying or a plumed serpent if there wasn't something that was actually seen? So imagine now you know nothing about modern day technology, and then all of a sudden you see or are introduced, or you stand in front of a plane, the fuselage. Well, what can that be compared to the most? Well, the first thing that you go to when there's no technology, it's the body of a snake. And there are these stories that then these snakes landed, their bellies opened, and people walked out. Well, you know, of course it didn't happen like that. It wasn't a flying snake. It was a machine. And those ancestors saw that, and they were completely blown away. Cargo cult behavior due to misunderstood technology. And Kukulkan or Quetzalcoatl is not the only example. Outside of Tikal is a Lake Yaja. And in Lake Yaja, they discovered these turtle artifacts. And the turtle is actually quite a significant ancient artifact anyway, worldwide, because it always talks about that a cosmic turtle came here, and with the cosmic turtle, life began. Well, in the area of present-day Guatemala, you can actually find different turtle artifacts, but the ones that are actual turtles have the design of the shell and the legs on the side and a normal turtle head. Well, that thing on Lake Yaja was actually something that looked like a turtle, but the head was encased in a helmet. There was a face on the inside of that helmet with goggles, and the body of that so-called turtle was completely aerodynamic, no shell design, with the front legs and the back legs pressed against the shell like this. And when I asked the local archaeologist there, and this is 1992, so this is a long time ago, there was no ancient aliens, and I asked the archaeologist, what are we looking at here? And he says, oh, this is a replica of one of the giant flying turtles that flew around here in the area back in the day. Well, I can assure you once again that those people knew exactly that turtles do not fly. So why do we have stories of giant flying turtles? Well, because maybe whatever they witnessed could be best described or compared to a gigantic turtle. So again, it's all misunderstood, which does not make those people in any way, shape, or form less intellectually bright, because this has nothing to do with intellect. It has everything to do with your technological frame of reference. Because our technological frame of reference today is not the same as it was, let's say, in the case of the Mayas 1,000 years ago, or in the case of the Egyptians 5,000 years ago. It's not the same like it was today. So it's not a question of, did they not understand anything? Yeah, they did. This is why we have all these artifacts, because they were like, man, nobody will believe us in the future if we don't carve this stuff in stone.
And even today, we use the term flying saucer to describe a UFO because it's shaped like a saucer. You talk about something and describe it in a way of something that people are familiar with.
Yes.
And even today, people refer to airplanes as birds. And the interesting thing about the turtle is that this shows up not just among the Maya, and it's
global.
It's the Native Americans. It's in Japanese mythology. You find it in India. It's everywhere. Which is it's fascinating that they all seem to have this same story of a turtle descending from the sky, which is not much different than saying a flying saucer.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you get to, just once you get to Colombia, from Mesoamerica, that's where at the Gold Museum in Bogota, that's where these famous gold airplanes are on display. And you're probably wearing one right now, Giorgio. Right.
Booth 323.
He has them for sale, yeah. And it's totally real. These things, nobody's making these things up. These gold airplanes, they're at the Gold Museum in Bogota, and they have a special display of them. And they put them in formation and stuff. They don't have a good explanation.
And that figure is something that does not exist in nature, because this is a so-called low-wing aircraft. And if they claim that this is nothing else but a stylized fish or a stylized bird or a mosquito, or some people say a stingray or a frog, birds have their wings, and also fish have their wings attached where we have our shoulders attached. And there is no such thing as a stabilizer in any of the birds that we know today. So, it's just incredibly strange, because they found hundreds of thousands of these gold objects, and they were in the shape of actual frogs and actual mosquitoes.
Birds and, flying fish and stuff. Yeah, they have those too.
Right.
Yeah.
And of these, only 17 out of the hundreds of thousands look like this.
Didn't you test one?
Yeah, didn't they in Germany?
Yes.
Did it in
RC plane.
So in 1996, these two guys by the name of Dr. Algen Eenboom and Peter Belting. Dr. Eenboom is a doctor, he's a dentist, and Peter Belting at the time was an Air Force controller, is sitting in the tower at the German Air Force. But in their private time, they are model plane makers or builders. And so what they did is they took exactly this pin, which is about this size in real life, and they did not add or omit an inch. And they blew it up, the ratio, and they blew it up to about this size, and then, this is 1996, and then they placed a propeller on the inside of that craft in order to mimic a jet engine. They turned on the propeller, they threw it up in the air, and it flew. So it was aerodynamically sound. Now, how would you know that aerodynamic concept 1,000 years ago?
One other comment I wanted to squeeze in there earlier. The idea of these gods, and I don't lose my train of thought. Oh man, it just popped right out of my head. It'll come back.
Okay. Well, okay, let me take this opportunity to...
Did it come back? It did, okay. When we're talking about the serpents, too many thoughts, man. When we're talking about the flying serpents, what's really interesting too about that is even today in Mexico, there's a gentleman that's the equivalent of 60 Minutes. His name's Jaime Musan. And in Mexico, people send UFO footage to the news like it's, a hot topic. It's not like it's downplayed here. Even to this day, Jaime Musan, you can Google it, go on YouTube, he has footage coming in from the local populace of literally what appear to be snakes in the sky. Now, you can see that these are some type of technology. They're not cigar-shaped. They're undulating and moving, and they're very large. And they seem to be some type of technological presence, which to a native, non-technological, thousands of years ago would probably call it a flying serpent. So even today, there's these reports of this technology, and we still don't have an accurate description for what they are.
And a lot of UFOs do change shape in different forms, and people see that in the sky, which is pretty unusual where they do things like that.
Which has led some people to suggest that whatever it is we're seeing right now perhaps could be organic. And if that is the case, that's just a mind blower.
You mean like a living organism?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, and the Chinese have beliefs that dragons flying through the sky, and they actually believe that dragons do that. Although you could also just identify flying dragons with airships and spaceships as a dragon, breathing fire even as it comes out the back or something. Yeah, I wanted to mention too that there's another object that is probably connected to the Mayans in a sense, and the Olmec, that was found in Panama actually, and it appeared in a number of catalogs. It's a zoomorphic glyph. It's made out of gold. It's about 8 inches long or something, and it looks like a backhoe. Okay, and it's got blades, and it's a piece of jewelry, and it's thousands of years old. And they call it a zoomorphic glyph because it's kind of as a monster. But as you look at it, it has blades on the back. It has even like what we call a backhoe. And Ivan T. Sanderson, who was British but lived in New Jersey for many years, and he would go on the Johnny Carson show all the time with different animals. He was a zoologist, but he was very much interested in unusual things like this. And yeah, he decided that this gold zoomorphic thing was really a representation of heavy machinery, of a backhoe. And so here we have these gold airplanes and things like that, but other heavy, technological things too are represented in these ancient jewelry.
People, I'm sorry, they'll ask you though, like, well, where is that today? Where is that technology? And I just point out that, like, even NASA, they're looking at going to Mars, and they don't bring everything with them there. They take 3D printers and things like that to use the local materials to build their foundation.
Well, then one time too, I was at a conference with Mark Lerner, who's a well-known Egyptologist, works with Sahiwas and whatnot. And at the conference, they were talking about ancient technology and like this, and he was being skeptical, and he said, well, look, he said, I'm looking for that Mercedes, ancient Mercedes in the desert that's showing high technology, but he said, but we can't find it, it's not there. And that's a false assumption in a sense, in the sense that you would find it. If you parked a bulldozer out anywhere here in the jungles of Panama and just left it, it won't be there after, in 100 years. That bulldozer will have rusted away, and it'll just be a pile of red dust, literally.
No, and that is correct, this assertion, because I think that the Mercedes are the pyramids. It's right there, and nobody's looking, because, with the whole ancient Egypt thing, it's just, the evidence is in front of their eyes, and they're looking for a Mercedes when it's right there.
Right, and they're not going to find that Mercedes. It's going to rust away. Gold is indestructible. All gold from ancient times still exists today. Gold is indestructible, but gold is a good electrical conductor, but gold is too soft, really, for machinery. And that's the problem. And the harder metals are going to oxidize and things like that. So this is the problem. But also, giant granite blocks and basalt blocks, they're largely indestructible too. So yeah, like Giorgio was saying, these pyramids, these giant temples, huge walls, they are that Mercedes in the desert.
Do you think it's possible that over time, with the British Museum, the Louvre, Germans, Nazis, that any of the good stuff that was there has already been possibly scooped up? I think there are still things out there, but I just wonder, the fascination for these technological civilizations has been going on for quite a while, that we maybe have been looking, and if there was anything of great interest, it's already been scooped up.
Well, and what is in museums around the world, and what I'm often looking for, aside from these gold objects and things like that, is objects made of quartz crystal, including crystal skulls and things like that. And they are in museums. And the British Museum, the museum in Mexico City, they have crystal objects that are pretty astonishing. And quartz crystal is also so hard that, it literally takes diamond tools to carve quartz crystal. And so anytime you see an object in any museum that's ancient and is made of quartz crystal, it would have had to have been made with really power tools and diamond tip drills and saws. That's what you would need.
Wasn't it in the 1970s or 68 or something where Hewlett-Packard examined the Mitchell-Hedges skull, and their conclusion was this skull should not exist, because not only was it polished and cut, but it was cut against the grain, because crystal grows in a certain direction. It was cut against that, which would mean that the piece that that you're working on, it would shatter. And it didn't. So what's going on? And these crystal skulls are interesting because over time, crystal skulls that are in the noted museums around the world, like in Paris, for example, there's, I think...
Yeah, there's one in Paris and one in the British Museum, too.
Yes,
yeah.
But haven't those been, in the last 10 years, deemed modern fakes? Because
they find tool marks on them, and so they feel they say, oh well, this can't be an ancient thing because it's got tool marks on it. But yet, even for anyone to have made this in the past or now, you need power tools, diamond tipped tools to work with that.
And we find signatures of such power tools not just on the crystal skulls, but also in ancient Egypt and worldwide, where you can actually see saw marks. And, archaeologists are saying, oh, no, they just carved it like that. I mean, you would be crazy to spend hours trying to create saw marks. For what? Occupational therapy?
Yeah, and on basalt and things like that. And actually, it's good to note that really the origin of the show, Ancient Aliens, comes out of the movie Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skulls. It was that movie really that ultimately led to Ancient Aliens. Yeah, so I think Ancient Aliens has something of that to Crystal Skulls.
Mm-hmm. Just recently too, I think we were reading for an episode or talking about the Toltecs, and someone in the same region of the Mayans.
Yeah, farther north. Yeah.
You see these statues that are appearing to be holding some type of a device that could be interpreted as some type of a plasma weapon or some type of rock-cutting stone, actually seeing the statues with some type of device. So there are a lot of questions as to how they would apply such a high heat, and it's very possible that maybe there are some hints in some of the statues and artifacts that could lead us to more clues.
And Giorgio and I were just discussing that the Mitchell-Hedges skull also has a connection back to the Maya, getting us back.
It was found in Belize. And then there's people out there who say that Anna Hedges never found it, and it's all a made-up story. And you know more about this, David. But why is everybody 100 years later, or 50 years later, they're all of a sudden labeled as liars? Come on now.
There are mysteries about the Mitchell-Hedges skull, and I knew her, Sammy Mitchell-Hedges, who was the owner. She died a few years ago. She lived to be 101 years old, Sammy did. But that was the thing, was that she claimed that it had been found on her birthday at Lubanton, in a Mayan city in southern Belize. But Mike Mitchell-Hedges himself wrote a number of books, and he only mentioned the crystal skull in his last book, a book called Danger, My Ally, which was published in 1957, and he died the next year. But in that book, and that's one of the first books that has a photo of that famous crystal skull in it, but he doesn't say that Sammy found the skull on her birthday. In fact, what he says very cryptically in that book, he says, how I came to have the crystal skull, is a story I won't tell, and so he basically will not say where he got it, but he doesn't say that she found it, but which is the typical story. One of the ideas with him, speaking of Indiana Jones and James Bond and whatnot, was that he was British Secret Service, and that one of his main job in Mexico was really to spy on what was going on during the Mexican Revolution in Mexico during that period. And that was a period of Pancho Villa revolutions in Mexico. And in fact, one of Mitchell-Hedges' books was I Rode with Pancho Villa. So, he was running around with some pretty, interesting people. And at that time, Britain didn't really have the oil, the North Sea oil that it has today. And at that time, Britain was importing most of their oil from Mexico. And they were concerned about the stability of Mexico, which was going through a revolution at that time. But it was during that time that he somehow got the crystal skull, the famous crystal skull. And so we just don't know exactly how he got it. And he was very cagey about it.
So we're gonna, we have about 15 minutes left, and we're gonna open it up to questions now. So there's a microphone up here on the left side of the stage. Go ahead and step up and ask your questions.
Yeah, she's here.
Hi guys.
Hello.
Giorgio, you remember how I welcomed you guys in Baltimore?
Yes,
What did I say?
I don't remember. I meet thousands of people per day.
I said, welcome to the 21st century. Remember that? Remember me introducing the Morgan Curve and the Badlands Guardian?
Yes.
You remember Van Daniken going, what is this? What is this? You remember that, right? Oh, yeah. Okay.
I don't know how many more times I can say yes. Yes.
I gave your wife the package that I sent to you in New York just a few weeks after I sent it, after the show. It came back. And I know you guys must have asked about it because I also sent Zachary Quintel a similar package. His didn't come back. So New York, typical New York, didn't give it to him. They told you they probably didn't get it, and they sent it back to me to cover their tracks. Okay?
Yeah, I have a question.
If you don't have a question, let's please move on.
I'm sorry.
Yes, let's move on, please.
Yeah, next person.
Next question.
Good afternoon, I'm Sue from Tomball, just outside of Houston. And my question is, when we were referring, the thought came to my mind when David was talking about the Olmecs and their facial features being so different. And what flashed in my mind was what Edgar Casey said about the hidden or the ancient knowledge that we don't know, that some of it's supposed to be under the Sphinx and out by the Bahamas, but they also say by the peninsula or whatever it is in Mexico.
Right.
And I'm wondering, could possibly some of these individuals, when Atlantis sank, came to or immigrated to that area?
Yeah, that's possible. I mean, some people think that. And yeah, you're talking about Edgar Casey, is what you just said, who was the sleeping psychic out of Virginia Beach. And he talked about these halls of records. And he said that we would find them. He said one was beneath the Sphinx. He said another one was in Bimini. But he did say a third was in Piedras Negras, which is today along the border of Guatemala. And it's in Guatemala. But it's right along the Usumacinta River with that. And so that's interesting that, Edgar Casey did specifically mention that site, and that is a Mayan site, that Piedras Negras. Yeah. So,
Okay.
yeah, it is possible what you're saying, we just don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Sanya. I'm Hungarian, a Magyar, and I wanted to talk about that. I'm sorry it's not about the Mayans, but I wanted to ask this earlier. We kind of lost our historical record, but from Noah to Ham to Cush to Nimrod was the grandfather of our people, built the Tower of Babel and was killed by, I think, Enki of the Anunnaki. And his sons were Hunor and Magor, which are the Huns and the Magyars. I'm a descendant of Magor, and I believe, we were there. We're one of the original languages, a very unique language. We have the most in common with the Sumerian language. I think there's about 50 words in common.
Who do you mean by we?
Hungarians.
Yeah, you
Magyars.
need to mention that.
Well, I think I did at the start, sorry. I said I'm a Magyar, and we were, I believe we are the Sumerian people. We are also the Magi. We were in Iran. We brought the gifts to Jesus. And our history has been totally lost since then. We've traveled to Europe in that meantime, and I think I'd like you guys to investigate that a little bit if you could.
Thank you, it's good information.
Isn't Hungary where there is you have a couple of ancient artifacts that look like actual grays with
Yes.
the almond eyes.
Yes.
When I was filming my show In Search of Aliens, I interviewed Dr. Gaspar, and as a gift he gave me this statue. It's a face, and it is allegedly, I mean it was a replica obviously, but about 1,500 years old, and it's the spitting image of a modern day gray. And that's fascinating. I mean, smack dab from Hungary, so really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah,
It's also thought that a Hungarian is very close language to Sumerian, Hungarian especially, I think.
Yes, it's used for translations actually.
Yeah.
That's, a lot of words in common.
very fascinating.
Good
Thank
to know.
you.
But anyway,
All
thanks.
right.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Belinda from Houston. I love the show. Two really quick questions. Are you going to do a show that's centering on the Kachina dolls from the Native American peoples?
We've done that.
Have you, I missed that, but some of those Kachinas, if you see them in the museums, some of them look like maybe some space.
Oh, absolutely. No, I've maintained, along with Eric von Daniken for decades now, that the Kachinas are a representation of the extraterrestrials. I mean, the Hopi, the entire star lore, or the mythology of the Hopi is all star lore of these star people descending from the sky and imparting knowledge.
Interesting.
Yeah, they think that. And the Zunis also have the
Yes,
same
of course.
belief, yeah.
Interesting. The second really quick question, do you think there's a possibility that start of the new age the Maya talked about, that they were talking about the possible pole shift and grand solar minimum that may be phasing in? Is that something they could have been talking about when they're talking about the new time period?
I'm not quite understanding the question.
Yeah, as far as the Mayan calendar?
There's like a magnetic pole shift that has been documented where the North Pole is moving, and that's accelerated.
Are you asking if
that may be
pole
what
shifts
they're
have happened,
talking
and if more are coming?
Yeah, if
Yes.
that may have been what caused a disturbance that caused the other prior advanced civilizations to get decimated. And if that was what they're warning us about. I was just wondering if you think that might be something, or, just questioning. Are you going to do a show maybe about something around that?
About ancient cataclysms?
Yes.
Yeah, we've done flood shows,
Yeah,
which
but
is
like
part
that-
of the that is a cataclysm.
Yeah, but if it pertains to something that might have been hinted at coming now because of the Mayas talking about,
No.
how you said that we're not sure when that time period
Ma'am, I
is.
think honestly it's just a misinterpretation, in my opinion, that there's not an end of an age, an apocalyptic event, it's an end of an era, and a new one is starting. So for me, when it's anything about like sun spurts coming out or earthquakes or anything, or some cataclysmic event, I personally don't see any evidence pointing to those things. They're astronomical markers pointing towards the end of an era and a new one beginning.
Okay, I guess I was just
Well,
wondering what you think
okay,
would happen
okay,
in the
there's a
era.
line
Just
behind you.
sorry.
Thank you.
Thank
Really.
you. Thanks, sir.
Thanks.
Okay. Hi, I'm Kate from Austin, and I spent a lot of time exploring ruins in Oaxaca. Are they like the Zapotec people, and do you think that they're related to the Maya and ultimately the Olmec?
Yeah, oh no, absolutely. And Oaxaca is a pretty interesting place. And there are megalithic ruins in Mexico, and they're like Monte Alban is that. Monte Alban, which was and that area is, Zapotec and Mixtec. And they're really, I think, also, like the Mayan, their ancestors were the Olmecs as the original ones. And in fact, there's Olmec stuff at Monte Alban. At Monte Alban, they actually cut the top of a mountain off. I mean, they just cut the top of this mountain off.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, it's something else. And then there's a city on top of this mountain that they built, kind of a Machu Picchu. Much of it's megalithic. There's unusual tunnels. There are Olmecs and stuff there. So the Mixtecs and the Zapotecs then became sort of from the Olmecs. And the Mayans are just a little bit farther south and to the east there. But Oaxaca is such a fascinating area. I mean, once you go into the very southern part of Oaxaca, that's where you get also into the Olmec heartland, allegedly, and then the Mayan stuff starts there too.
Great.
But Oaxaca is definitely like that. So and that's one of the most interesting areas there. And so Monte Alban. There's also Mitla.
Yeah.
That's right there too, and that's also a megalithic site. Yeah.
Right.
Well, thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
Hey, I'm Bo. I'm from Florida. Love your show. Quick question, real easy one. Why aren't the aliens here? Why don't they just come out and say hello and tell us what's going on?
Who said they're not here?
Why don't they just come out and
Who said they're not here?
Yeah, who's saying that?
No, seriously, why don't they just come out and
I just gave you a very serious answer. Who says they're not here?
But why don't they just come out?
Because this room in here would be ecstatic, and anybody outside, they would fall into a panic. Because believe it or not, while in the United States and in Europe, the extraterrestrial question is something that is openly discussed, you go to some countries in Asia, and the aliens there are ghosts. Like when you go to the Philippines, there's a lot of eyewitness reports of lights up in the sky. And in the Philippines, for example, they always say, oh, these are ghosts, when in reality, in my opinion, those are UFOs. So the planet, while we are doing a great job here and carrying forward this message, the planet is certainly not ready for the reveal.
Yeah, same thing with the government not disclosing everything, because our favorite shows are sci-fi shows. They make billions of dollars. So why not just disclose it? Say, hey, here they are.
Because of the idea that perhaps this would cause a world panic. I mean, Eric von Daniken has a word for this, or a term for this. He calls it the shock of the gods. And so ancient aliens and different movies and things like that are preparing us that this shock of the gods will not happen. And we are on our way right now. But if you talk to anyone, outside of the U.S., Europe, or whatever, sometimes here it has changed. But over there, when you talk about UFO, Eric lives in Switzerland, and to this day he is ridiculed in Switzerland. It's very strange.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to say too that as Jason was saying too, that in Mexico and in Peru and in South America, the whole idea of extraterrestrials and what goes on in ancient aliens is very, very popular. It's much more normal, and local TV stations, they show lots of UFO footage, and there's a lot of UFO activity, particularly in South America, and it's on the news. I mean, they talk about it, and they don't mind talking about it. It's a very popular subject.
And in fact, I'd like to add, oftentimes I'm asked, when do you, Giorgio, think disclosure will happen? Well, disclosure, in my opinion, will never be a press conference like what we're doing right now here with this panel, where they will make the announcement, yes, extraterrestrials are real. Disclosure, in my opinion, is a process, and we are right in the middle of disclosure. Everything that's happening right now is part of that process.
I agree. In fact, I think we are surrounded by aliens. We may all be aliens, so.
We're hybrids, all of us,
yes,
because
absolutely.
they created us in their image, which inherently makes us them.
And you are a brilliant messenger. Thank you.
Thank you. All of us here.
Thank you for this opportunity.
And also, I would like to say something real quick. That is, we also should be really grateful and thankful for Prometheus Entertainment and the History Channel, that they keep wanting to have these shows on without telling us what we can do and cannot do. And Max Thompson here, he has been my voice for the past 10 years. Without Max, the show would not even be here.
Thanks, George.
And of course, a gigantic thanks also to Kevin Burns, the creator of Ancient Aliens, because without him too, we would not even be here. So I think we should all give Kevin, he's in Oak Island right now, a big round of applause.
I think it's worth noting too that no one tells Ancient Aliens or Prometheus, what they can or cannot put on the show. As far as I know, is that right? I mean, there's nobody there trying to censor the show. No.
That stole my fire. I was going to ask you if you get heat, if you're getting pushback, the men in black telling you, back off, you're getting too close, or, that was part of my question. And the other part of the question
We're doing a Men in Black episode this season, so.
Looking forward to that. Thank you for the best show on television for the last 10, 11, 12 years. This is like,
thank you for watching.
Show I watch besides football. But let me just get this question in really quick. I think it's important to document in stone everything that you guys have already uncovered, that you're putting out there. We have social media and the internet and everything, but if that disappears, where is your progress going to be documented in stone? I think that, can I do that for you? Can I help you?
This is why I don't like the cloud, because of exactly what you're addressing. Yeah,
I feel it would be important. So
I think there should be an Ancient Aliens Mount Rushmore.
I'll bring my margin.
Giorgio to hair, right? Yeah, great. Solid granite. How about that?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Got it.
Hello.
Hi.
So I have it's a basic question. What would you say is, like, all three of you guys, your smoking gun when someone asks you, like, why do you believe that aliens have been to Earth? You know, what is your, like, concrete evidence that you guys feel is, like, number one?
For me, I'm going to have to say it's Puma Punku. I hope I'm not stealing Giorgio's thunder, but I have to actually step off for a minute. I apologize, but Puma Punku is the one for me. Thank you, guys.
All right.
And I have to back up Jason on this, because Puma Punku is one of the most fascinating archaeological places on Earth. And if you have a bucket list and your bucket list is full, eliminate something else and add Puma Punku and go there as soon as you can, because your brain will melt when you arrive at Puma Punku.
All right. Well, thank you guys.
Yeah. Oh, and what is yours, Bob? I mean, look, it's also...
Puma Punku.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Puma Punku is one piece of evidence. And, it's not necessarily a smoking gun. It's a smoking gun only if you take it into context of everything. See, the great thing about the ancient astronaut theory is that it combines different areas of research. Because this is the unfortunate problem of modern day science, or of modern day professors, that a professor of Egyptology will never have a conversation about with a professor of myology, or with a Sumerian, or anything like that. So we are suggesting that all these scientists should be talking together and question, why are there so many correlations and connections? Because they always say, oh, it's just coincidence. And I always say, look, even after a while, even coincidence doesn't make any sense anymore. So we have to find out, well, then how is that even possible?
For sure.
All right.
Thank
you
you guys.
All right, thanks.
Hello.
Hi.
Just really quick, I noticed we've had a couple of episodes about individuals maybe ahead of their time, like Nikola Tesla, and then Da Vinci. I was wondering if we could maybe expect a question or an episode about Elon Musk, or maybe guest appearances from him. And your opinion?
And SpaceX, yeah. I would just say that it's great that we have these private space programs now like that. I mean, we need that.
I said 30 years ago that the future of space will be the privatization of space travel, and here we are. I mean, how cool is it that I think in the next 20 years we can go to outer space and have have a spin around the Earth in lower Earth orbit for an hour or two. I mean, I'll sign up. And by the way, anybody ever says, oh, it's so expensive, it's so expensive. Do you remember when the first DVD players or the first VCRs came out? They were $5,000 a pop. And now they're throwing them at you for $5. Okay? So also space travel over time will become affordable.
And, we've featured, we've included Elon Musk in some episodes.
Oh, okay.
Once his spaceship gets to Mars, we'll give him his own episode. I think that's fair.
But it's great that we have like Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and others, all, spending their wealth to go private space companies. That's great. I mean, I applaud that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I have a question. If you could write it down, I mean, so you can check me out. And what you were saying about time, it'll stop and change. In the Bible, in the book of Isaiah 13, the planets were 1/3 of the stars would fall. So in that particular year, the earth would wobble like a drunkard. It will move out of its place. So like you said, time would change. And that's where time would change. And also in the book of Amos chapter 8, verse 9, the sun will go down at noontime. So at that particular time, we won't have food to eat. We will be eating each other. That's in the book of Ezekiel chapter 5. So I wonder if you can do an episode on that. You know, where you can use the
About cannibalism? No. We actually have. We actually, when we were in Nukuhiva in the Marquesas, you know, so we've interviewed, you know, anthrophages or whatever they were called, but I don't think so.
Oh, but that's what I was asking about that, because if you can look that up, you know, to check me out, see, verify me. And then another one question, that's it, I'll stop. Did y'all ever accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior? Just asking, I mean, I don't want to start a fight, this is not about that.
That's a personal question that should not be asked in public.
Okay.
Separation of church and state. Separation of church and state. All right, one more question. One more question. I'm not ending on that note. Wait a second, you had your question. All right, next one.
Hi, my name is Donna from Houston, Texas. I have an experience in 1968. I was 14 years old. I went to Belize City, and about 30 miles, I would say northeast of Belize City, the locals would use their matches and hashed away in the jungle to get to a clearing where there is a Mayan, 4 Mayan pyramids in the jungle. And we climbed one of them on one of the pyramids to the top. It was black, and you could see above the jungle, and you could see the Caribbean Sea. Now, my question to both of you is, could it be that the black top of the pyramid may have been like a helicopter pad, maybe?
We've suggested that multiple times on Ancient Aliens. It's not an idea that I personally agree with, but hey, if that were the case, I would not be surprised.
Okay.
And many Mayan pyramids are flat top. Not all of them. Some, like in Tikal and stuff, they have like buildings, but some are flat, and yeah, you could see a helicopter or a flying saucer landing on them, sure.
Okay, the second question is the difference between the Egyptian pyramids versus the Mayan. Could have been different watchers that passed on the knowledge to the people.
That's a possibility. Eric von Daniken always says that he does not think that there's a connection between the two because chronologically speaking, they're thousands of years apart when they were built. So it's possible that Egyptians, you know, went to Maya land and started to construct stuff, but that it all happened at the same time, that's certainly out of the question.
Well, the Egyptian pyramids are a couple thousand years older than Mayan pyramids, generally.
We're going to take one more question. We're out of time, but
Thank
we're going to just take one more question, then we'll...
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. This question actually comes from my daughter, to Giorgio. Her name is Natalie. She want to know, Giorgio, what was the most fascinating thing you saw at Pumapunku?
The whole place. You know, Pumapunku is an altitude of 14,000 feet, and when you hang out there, the oxygen there is virtually non-existent, and so the first few days when you get there, you should acclimatize yourself in La Paz before you go up there, because it's even higher in Pumapunku. And, you know, Pumapunku is a place where I jump around like a mountain goat. So I don't care about the oxygen, and especially now, more and more artifacts are being discovered and monoliths that are underneath the soil, all with new ground-penetrating radar.
Yeah. So
it doesn't matter which way you turn at Pumapunku, it's all incredible. It really is.
They're finding that, yeah, at Pumapunku and Tiwanaku, there's a giant buried citadel there, and they're digging it out. There's tunnels, there's even pyramids underground and stuff like that.
Incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Nice.
They're just starting the excavations, really.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
My daughter, Natalie, thank you very much.
Thank you.